Con casi 100 millones de juegos vendidos alrededor del mundo, Jenga es uno de los juegos de mesa más populares. Y hoy te voy a contar cómo empezó. Lo que está diseñado para hacerte feliz no siempre tuvo un inicio feliz. Yo soy Enrique y esto es Diseño Feliz. Las historias detrás del diseño de juguetes, caricaturas, cómics, videojuegos y todo lo que nos sigue haciendo felices. Hola, ¿cómo están? Bienvenidos y bienvenidas. Yo soy Enrique y este es el episodio número 29 de Diseño Feliz por Disliz. Hace mucho no hablábamos de juegos de mesa, ya hablamos de la historia de Monopoly y no sé tú, pero entre Monopoly y Jenga eran de mis juegos favoritos. Y obviamente no podíamos dejar pasar la oportunidad de contar la historia de Jenga. Pero no te la voy a contar yo, sino te la va a contar la propia creadora, Leslie Scott. Tuve el enorme placer de platicar con ella y esta es su historia. ¡Comenzamos! Hola Leslie, muchísimas gracias otra vez por tu tiempo para platicar con nosotros. Y quiero empezar desde el principio. No sé si nos puedas compartir un poco tu vida desde el inicio, porque sé que naciste en Tanzania, pero después te estuviste mudando de país en país dentro de África muchísimo. Entonces no sé si nos puedas platicar un poco de en dónde naciste y por qué te mudabas tanto y cómo era tu vida en esos primeros años.
Lots of questions there. So why we moved a lot was because I was born in Tanzania, and that's where my mother was born too. So my mother was and her mother before her was also born in Africa. So we've got on my mother's side, Africa. We're Africans in the sense that we've been, generations born in Africa, either East Africa as I was, or in South Africa. Okay. My father, so my mother was living in Tanzania as an adult. She was living and working there as an adult, having grown up there. And my father went out to East Africa just after the war. Okay. So he was a Spitfire pilot in the RAF during the war, and he was just a youngster. And when the war came to an end, he wasn't ready to sort of settle down and just go to an office in London. I think that's how he sort of tells the story. He couldn't imagine just doing something like that. Yeah. And so he just wanted he wanted to carry on a life of adventure. And he went out to, actually he first went out to Kenya to take up a job as a reporter for a newspaper in Kenya. But by the time he got there, it took a few months to get there. By the time he got there, it was the job had gone. I think he'd lost the opportunity. So he just, I don't know how he ended up, but he ended up down in on the coast in Tanzania, and there he I think he started almost immediately working for an oil company as a sort of oil salesman, and met my mother. And he stayed with this company all his working life. He sort of started as literally driving around this vast country, trying to persuade people to set up petrol stations in parts of the country, but they didn't know what a car was, so they had absolutely no idea. I mean, he was sort of trying to persuade people that this was the next big thing. You absolutely needed a petrol station thousands of miles in from the coast. So, but anyway, that was his life, and he met Mum, and we were they were married there, and three of us were born. I have four. There are four of us. I and two siblings were born in Tanzania. Okay. But then Dad then moved. He moved with the oil company, which it became Mobil Oil, and so he worked for Mobil Oil, mostly in East Africa, but then also in West Africa during the course of his career. And they were kind of like postings. I suppose we weren't a military family, but it was a little bit like a military posting in the sense that, or more like, let's say, the kind of job kind of postings you'd get if you worked for the Foreign Office, if you work for an embassy or something, you sort of, it seemed to be pretty much every 4 years or so, he was moved. I mean, I don't know why, but he was, and quite a few times it was actually in East Africa. So we went from Tanzania to Uganda, and then to Kenya, and then from Kenya we spent a year in England, and then went from there to Sierra Leone, then back to Kenya, and then finally his final posting was back in West Africa in Ghana. And so we just sort of moved, and in my life, my part of that was that I was schooled in whichever country we were in until I was 13, or just before I was 13, and then and we were sent to school in England, partly because just to sort of have some sort of continuity in our education.
Okay. Entonces era como un internado, digámoslo así, un internado en Inglaterra. Tus papás se seguían moviendo en África, pero tú y tu hermana ya se quedaron en un internado ahí en Inglaterra.
Correct, yeah, exactly. So I was at school down in the West Country in England.
¿Y cómo era o cómo te sentías tú con esa experiencia de vida? Me imagino que por un lado debe haber sido padrísimo o increíble estar viviendo en todos estos países de África, pero por otro lado, pues no tenías tantos amigos, ¿no? No podías hacer tantos amigos porque después te mudabas a otro país. Me imagino que ya a los 13 años, pues ya en el internado, pues sí pudiste tener amigos, pero antes, ¿cómo te sentías? ¿Lo veías normal o sí te afectaba cuando te ibas a otro país y dejabas a todos tus amigos en ese país?
It was just, it's interesting. I mean, speaking with hindsight now, I'm surprised that how it was just our life. It's a funny way of putting it, but we did that, and pretty much all our friends were doing that. So it was very common, certainly amongst people that were. I mean, we were Brits. We had British nationality, and it was very common amongst the friends that I had, and maybe this is why I had these friends, is because they had similar lifestyle in the sense that you had these very intense friendships at school, but you didn't see those friends. I never saw any of my school friends during the holidays, but every holidays you go back and you would see. Sometimes they would be the same people because we'd be, we overlapped. So we'd have, say, maybe a few years running where there was a few people who were the same people. But often it was, you went back and immediately had to make a whole set of new friends. And I think it's what the impact it's had on me is that I actually, I would say I was quite resilient in the sense that I can sort of, I don't mind my own company. I can sort of do that. But I also, I guess I've always made friends quite fast because you kind of had to.
Yeah.
You're sort of forced into that situation and also they were, it was very, very multinational, very multicultural, multinational.
That's
groups of people. So, I don't know, the Indian ambassador's son, I remember being a really good friend in Ghana. But it was a whole group of people who you wouldn't necessarily have met. I wouldn't have met if I had just been at school in England. So I guess I think I don't know how that's impacted me. I think I have friends who led similar lives because their parents were overseas. Who moved a lot, and actually they with their lives they've almost done the opposite. They found that they found that quite disturbing. What they've done with their own children is make sure that they're very much rooted in a spot, because they don't want to move all over the place. But I like the idea of I sort of feel like I don't belong anywhere in particular, but equally I feel quite comfortable in all sorts of different places. So there's that.
Pues sí, me imagino que ha de haber sido una experiencia bastante pues única, que hayas tenido la oportunidad de conocer diferentes países y tener diferentes amigos. Y ahora, Leslie, quiero adelantarme un poco más en el tiempo, porque sé que tú y tu familia jugaban este juego parecido a Jenga, obviamente muchísimo antes de que se llamaba Jenga, ¿no? Donde ponías los bloques, hacías una torre y empezabas a quitarlos. Pero también leí que ese juego no existía ni en África ni en el mundo. O sea, lo inventaron dentro de tu familia. ¿Me puedes platicar un poco de este juego, de quién lo inventó dentro de tu familia y por qué se les ocurrió este juego?
What actually happened was that we were living in Ghana, and which is a country of wood. I mean, one of their biggest exports is the wood. It certainly was. And so there were a lot of sawmills and a lot of, and we had a lot of wooden things made while we were there, sort of furniture and so on. And I have a much younger brother who's 12 years younger than I am. Okay. And he was, I guess, about sort of 5 at the time when we were in Ghana. And he had a set of building blocks that were, just a children's building block. That was what it was for. It's a little bit wooden blocks that were offcuts from a sawmill, and they were, but they were sort of quite even offcuts. They're not exactly the same size as a Jenga block is now, but think in those terms, that similar, very similar sort of size, and he would play with these building blocks with them as we. As all kids do with sort of building blocks, and that evolved into, playing with him and just mucking around with the blocks. That evolved into sort of building a tower that you had to take one block out and put it on the top. Sort of similarly to what ended up being Jenga.
Yeah,
it was in some sense it was different. It wasn't exactly the same as Jenga ended up being. To the outsider, it seems like it was almost exactly the same. It was actually significant. But there was a significant difference to it. Anyway, we played around this, and we had. When I say we, I mean just sort of within the family, developed this game, and it wasn't. There wasn't an invention in the sense of going, ta-da, this is go from sitting there and thinking, do this. It just kind of evolved, and I find it incredibly difficult to ever sort of pinpoint a moment. I mean, I'd love to be able to say, I just had this moment of how to play this game.
Got it.
I didn't. I mean, we just sort of evolved, and it just seemed fun, and we had, I don't know, maybe 10 sets of these blocks made. And we played it in Ghana, and then I came to live in Oxford when I was about when I left school, so sort of 18 going on 19, and I brought a set of these blocks with me, and I sort of played the game occasionally with friends when they came round, and every time I played it with somebody, it was like they really liked it, and they had never come across it before, and so it was a really slow process where I like some years later, where I suddenly thought, this game doesn't exist. I mean, it's not a game. It's not the specific. Piling wooden blocks up was obviously something that children have already done. Yeah. The idea of actually removing a block from it and putting on the top, just nobody had done that. and it sounds kind of crazy, but so the kind of that spark of a moment where you go, aha, was like a sort of slow to me. And then I thought, and I was actually looking to, I mean, it's a kind of long story to this bit, but I had been working for a company, actually for Intel, you know, the microcontroller people in Oxford, where they had an office in Oxford. And this was at a time when nobody had heard, they had only just invented the microprocessor. The whole idea of a computer on a chip, a whole computer on a chip, was Intel's thing.
Yeah.
And that had only just been invented. So nobody had ever heard of this company. Nobody had heard of a microprocessor. I mean, I literally mean nobody. I mean, we were in Oxford, I mean, in the time that I was working with them, of course, many people came to know of it. But at the beginning, I was in an office in Oxford with Intel. You know, Oxford's a university town where there an awful lot of engineers and artists and things who had no idea that the company that had invented the microprocessor was just up the road. And I had done physics at school. I'd done an A-level in physics. And I'd never heard of this. So I ended up working with this thing, and I'm looking at this material, and I'm thinking, oh my God, what is it? What are they talking about? And I got sort of kind of interested in it all. I mean, I'd only gone up to work with them in a very brief way. I was going out to help out a friend there. Anyway, the reason I'm telling you about that is because I had worked for them for about 4 years, and I had had this fantastic job with them where basically the company was exploding. The interest in what was going on up there was, I mean, everybody from bank managers to sort of IBM people were trying to figure out how they might use microprocessor. And because I happened to be there at the right time, I was in this job of running what they called their marketing communications department. And they just left me alone. I mean, I was in my early 20s, running around doing pretty much, I mean, you know, I was always trying to do what they wanted me to do, but nobody really knew what they wanted me to do. So I had this fantastic job. It was amazing. And it completely, and as they got bigger and bigger, I mean, they become a huge, when I joined them, there were 5 people. Wow. By the time I left them, there were sort of like 300, nearly 400 people in a great big building some miles from me, and they started to sort of regulate it all. I was supposed to give plans and reports and go to sales meetings and things like that, and it all became much more sort of rigid. Got it. Having been something that was somebody just trusted me to get on with whatever it was that we'd agreed that I was going to do. And so I thought, I've had enough of this. But I was ruined for working for a company. I mean, that was basically, I'd had no experience for working for somebody, you know, in the normal sense of having a proper job with a proper title and so on. Yeah. And so I thought, I'm going to just start a business. I'm just going to start a company. I mean, that was my first thought. And then I thought, well, what am I going to do with this company? And that was the moment I thought, why don't I turn this handmade wooden blocks into a proper game? And that's what I launched into doing.
Está increíble, pero vamos a regresarnos bastante más al pasado. En ese juego que estabas jugando de niña, ¿tenía algún nombre? ¿Le llamaban pues, el juego de construir torres? ¿O qué nombre tenía el juego que jugabas con los bloques de tu hermano?
The sawmill that I was talking about, that we got it from, was in a town called Takoradi, which is a port in Ghana, just down from Accra, which is where we lived. And that's where we had the blocks made. So we used to call it within the family Takoradi bricks.
Buenísimo. ¿Y cómo conectaste los puntos? Me voy a adelantar ahorita un poco, porque sé que trabajaste en Intel, en la parte de marketing y de comunicación y todo eso, pero ¿cómo conectaste los puntos y por qué dijiste voy a empezar una empresa de juegos de mesa y no una empresa de algo relacionado a tecnología o a marketing o a comunicación? ¿Qué era lo que tenías tú, o era la experiencia que tenías tú al trabajar en Intel? ¿Por qué un juego de mesa?
When I was at Intel, I had been involved in putting on creating stands and things, trade show stands.
Ah, okay.
Yeah, for Intel to take around, and I came up with this whole thing of having a moving exhibit that we used to take around Europe. And the company that I had got to actually create that for me, they were a design company that that actually made the stands, I can't think of the word because I think in America they call them booths, but I think here we sort of have these exhibition stands that you make when you go to trade shows and things. They would make these, and they had helped me create this whole exhibition that I'd put on at one point. And so when I actually left Intel, I actually worked for them for about a year, actually helping them market their things. And they were fundamentally wood people. They had come out of being they had been a building company that had moved into becoming a company that made cabinet. They were a team of cabinet makers who were making things like kitchen cabinets and very, very high end sort of wood cabinet making.
Yeah.
And they had used those skills for making exhibition stands. And so I befriended I got very close to some of the carpenters that were working there. So when that wasn't the reason I went onto the game as such, but the reason I think I thought I'm going to try this game was because, actually go into the toy business, if you like.
Yeah.
I don't think I thought of it in those terms. I just thought this is a game. Was that I had been playing the game with. I started to realise that people were inviting me for dinner or for to come round to their house and they would always say, "And bring your game." So it was like they wanted to play it, and it just sort of and some of these people were professional tennis players.
Okay.
Real tennis players, and so I had a group of friends who were professional sports people who were completely obsessed by my game. They absolutely loved it, and they would really compete with each other when they were playing this. And then on the other hand, I had these friends who were cabinet makers, and so when I thought I'm going to do this, I was never intending to work for this company for that long. It was only I had only thought it would be a year or so that I'd work with them. But I went to this one particular cabinet maker, who friend of mine, who, and I said, look, I have this block of, I'm trying to think about how to mass produce these handmade blocks of wood.
Got it.
But it's essential that you have irregularities, if you like, in the blocks that are there because they were originally sort of handmade. And also, I wanted to sort of, and I sort of figured out that the blocks themselves, the ones that we've just sort of adopted, if you like, to make the game, were a little bit too long in proportion to their width.
Yeah.
It's very difficult to describe this without using my hands. But when I played the game originally, you'd take the blocks and you'd put them on their side rather than flat. You still do it 3 by 3, but you put them on their side, because if you put them flat, then when you put the next 3 crossways on the top, they wouldn't. They were not. They overlapped.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So, I mean, if you look at a Jenga blocks now, they are the width of them, the length of them, is 3 times the width
Okay.
So that when you stack them, what you've got is something that you can square it off. You can pat it together and square it off, and you can create quite a stable tower to begin with.
Yeah.
That's not how the blocks were slightly different size. Just by default, because I hadn't really thought about it before, and therefore you had to sort of pile them on their sides, and you left a gap. So it was a little more like a lattice work you were creating as you built the tower to start with, which meant that it was always pretty unstable to start with. So I figured out if I changed the dimensions slightly, and so you could start with a much more stable tower to start with, the game would last longer, be better. But I still needed to have some, but if they were identical, I mean, if you made them out of plastic, for example, so every block is identical to every other block, it doesn't work. The game simply doesn't work, because there's right at the beginning, everything is very evenly, the weight, one layer above is exactly the same sort of weight pressing down on the layer below.
Got it.
Whereas the handmade nature of them means that they're all slightly different from each other. And so when you stack a game to begin with, you notice that there are ones that are already loose because there's nothing leaning on them.
Yeah.
But it's random, and it was very, very important that this random, that this wasn't built into it. There wasn't a sort of mold that you poured something into, that you had a certain number of blocks per set were different. They all had to be different. And this chap helped me figure out how you could mass produce
different
and introduce this random nature to it, which is key to the game.
Claro, y eso es lo que me parece realmente pues, muy asombroso, porque, bueno, ya lo dijiste tú, ¿no? Tenías o habías estudiado física en la carrera, pero ¿cómo te diste cuenta que los bloques tenían que ser diferentes? Porque trajiste a Inglaterra los bloques de madera, que sí eran hechos a mano, entonces por eso eran diferentes. Pero cuando ya querías producirlos a masa, o sea, cuando hiciste tu primer molde, digamos, de ladrillos de plástico, ¿cómo te diste cuenta que no servían si eran completamente idénticos los bloques, y para que el juego funcionara tendrían que ser diferentes?
Well, it was partly because when I made the first sets that I had made for when I was deliberately thinking about turning this into a game, a commercial game, I actually just had them sort of. They were still wood, so there's always an element with wood that you obviously know one thing can be absolutely identical to another. But when I first made them, had them made for me. I mean, I'm not a wood in my life, but I asked this chap to make them for me, make me 54 blocks, and he made them they were as identical as possible, already incorporating this idea that they were going to be a slightly different dimension. The length to width ratio was I'd figured that out, that would work a lot better if you had it like that. That first game didn't really work very well. I mean, it was fine. I mean, you could push the blocks, you could make them work, and that's when I sort of thought, well, I mean, it was just suddenly became sort of, if you like, obvious to me that if you that was what was key to this game, was that it had this random difference incorporated into it.
Perfecto. Y ahora, Leslie, quiero saltarme un poco más en el tiempo y quiero enfocarme ahorita a hablar del nombre, porque leí mucho que te obsesionaste un poco con el nombre y pasaste muchísimo tiempo buscando el nombre perfecto. Y habían varias opciones. Una de esas opciones era el nombre del perro de tu mamá. Pero ¿cuál era la visión que tenías y por qué era tan importante para ti, para que el juego tuviera un nombre original y único?
Okay. Well, there were two things there. One was, I mean, so much of this is about sort of intuition, than it is about sort of going through some sort of logical
Yeah.
process. It was just, I wanted a name. I absolutely wanted a name that would, and I mean, this sounds sort of strange now to say this, but this is absolutely the case, is that that wouldn't mean anything to anybody, but would end up meaning the name of the game.
Yeah.
And that it needed to be fairly short and snappy.
Yeah.
I mean, Takoradi Bricks, I don't know, partly because it's the name of a place, and partly because it didn't. I knew I knew why we called it that, but it didn't seem to mean anything. I don't know, it just didn't work, is the answer to that. But why? And I don't know, in a funny way, I don't know that I did spend so much time in actual physical, actual hours, if you like. It was more a process of thinking, I want a name that's great, that I can sort of put on the side of the box, that people, that's not difficult to pronounce. Although I since then realized, of course, in Spanish, I mean, I've had all sorts of people tell me that it's either Jenga or it's Jenga or something. but basically, I just thought it's easy. I just wanted something easy to pronounce, what I thought would be easy to remember, and that would actually one day mean, if you said the name, it would mean people would think of the game.
Okay.
And the reason my mother's dog comes into the story is that basically, because we grew up in East Africa, and my mother, even more so than me, we all spoke Swahili. Yeah. But my mother spoke perfect Swahili. We spoke kind of, rough and ready Swahili. But as a family, we always gave Swahili words as names to dogs, or I mean, we would refer. We still do it as a family. If if you can't find the right word, you just come up with, you use a Swahili word.
Okay.
So and there, I mean, as you know, in all languages, there's sort of words that are almost untranslatable. So so Swahili was using a Swahili word to sort of name something was pretty much just something that we always did in the family. And my mother's dog's name at the time that I came up with when I was looking for a name was Cheza, and Cheza in Swahili means play. Okay. So I thought at one point, Cheza is actually quite a nice name. I still think it might have been quite a nice name, but it just didn't seem quite right. So we were sort of throwing. I was actually at that point. My mother was now living in England, and I was renting a space in a. I was actually staying in. Where was I from? I think I was staying in her attic at one point, sort of in between houses. Anyway, and so I just remember we sort of throwing out words, and she said Kajenga, and I thought, well, that's a really cool word. And Kajenga means to build. It's the verb to build.
Yeah.
But the imperative is Jenga, and when she said the word Jenga, I went, that's it. I mean, it's a word that, unless you speak Swahili, which I mean, outside of East Africa now more people do, but they didn't at the time. There were very few people spoke Swahili. I mean, within East Africa, of course, many people do, but outside of Africa, I thought the word Jenga would have no other meaning, and so one day it would be the game.
The game.
Yeah. And I think I'm still curious why that worked, because I mean, it was a game. I ended up having to fight to keep that name.
Sí, justo eso era lo que te iba a preguntar, porque leí que muchas personas les gustaba muchísimo el juego y estaban interesados en comercializar el juego, pero te decían, cámbiale el nombre. O sea, te daban muchísimos consejos de que ese nombre no iba a funcionar. Entonces, ¿cuál era tu intuición o por qué la obsesión de mantener este juego? Porque también sé, no sé si es verdad, pero también sé que era pues casi un deal breaker en muchos casos donde decían, si no cambias el nombre, no te hacemos ningún acuerdo.
Well, it was a deal breaker. It was nearly a deal breaker once because I put that game on the market myself, so nobody there wasn't any. When I put it on the market here in England, I mean, there was nobody then telling me that I shouldn't call it Jenga. I just did it, and I advertised it, and I did I worked with that. So I had it. It was called Jenga for about. I'd had it on the market myself for about 3 years. And before it became something where first it was a Canadian company first of all, that wanted to license it out, wanted me to license it to them in first of all in Canada, but also then I think almost immediately for the rest of the world too. And they were the ones. When the negotiations were going on, they were saying, it's crazy. This is, for them, the problem was that this was a new, the whole game was a new concept, if you like, for the toy world. I mean, apart from the few thousand that I'd sold, it wasn't something that, they were in the position they were going to have to sell a whole new concept. They couldn't say it was like something else. I mean, the nearest thing at the time they could say was like, something like pickup sticks, but it's so not like pickup sticks. So they had a whole new idea. They had a product that I had found had to be demonstrated for anybody somebody had to see why a block of bricks, a set of blocks would become an exciting game. Yeah. So they saw it as a huge problem. They said, so you've got this new idea, new sort of problem of marketing, and then on top of that, you've got a name that means nothing. It's not going to mean anything to anybody. It doesn't explain how the game's played. There's nothing about it that works for them. And I at the time I called it Jenga, the perpetual challenge. And I meant it. I meant perpetual as in it's always a challenge. Yeah. And they came back and they said they wanted to take the game. They thought it was great. But they thought the name was appalling. And they said nobody knows what Jenga means, and nobody in North America will know what the word perpetual means either. I can remember I remember really clearly. I was in a really difficult situation at that time because I had invested so much in getting Jenga off the ground, and I was in such debt. And here was I was having this phone conversation with somebody in America in Canada rather, saying they wanted it, and this is what they do. But we really need to change the name. And I said, well, you could change perpetual.
Change perpetual, but don't change Jenga.
And anyway, this is something that I now know, because I've done a lot of things since then, that I realized that one of the best things you can do is always put something into your design that you're prepared to compromise. Pretend you're hanging on to it, pretend you compromise, and then somebody compromise. And people forget the one thing that you really didn't want to change. They forget all that. I mean, that was my takeaway message.
Pero a ver, quiero ir un poquito más profundo en esto, porque también leí que en esa época, en esos 3 años que tú desarrollaste y tú estás comercializando el juego por tu cuenta, pues obviamente tenías una crisis financiera y tenías unas deudas enormes. Y con todo y todo, estabas con un pie bastante firme que querías mantener el nombre del juego. Aunque eso significara perder algunos acuerdos o perder algunos acuerdos para que comercializaran tu juego. Entonces, ¿por qué tomaste esa decisión o por qué esa visión de mantener el nombre a pesar de que te pueda costar pues los acuerdos y las negociaciones que ya tenías, que probablemente esas negociaciones y esos acuerdos te podían digamos desaparecer las deudas que tenías y todo el estrés financiero que tenías?
I find it,
Yeah.
it's incredibly difficult to answer that question. I can only say that maybe some of it is, I mean, I haven't thought of it this way, but you know, I'd lived with this for 3 years, and maybe it's like somebody telling you that you've got to change your baby's name because they don't like it, or whatever. I mean, whatever. It's something like that. But it was something. It just, to me, it physically looked like it was a nice thing to write. The word looks nice. It did, I guess, because it did mean something to me. I mean, I knew what it meant, and so it had some. It wasn't completely random, if you like.
Yeah.
But I've actually written about this because I'm so uncertain why. I'm really interested in the whole thing about why do some new words stick when others don't anyway. It's like, you know, why do some any new ideas stay when others don't? But with a word, it's really you know, there are people that have their whole businesses around the idea of coming up with brand names for companies and so on. I mean, people make a lot of money from doing this, so to a certain extent, it's kind of interesting I would love to be able to tell you that I know exactly why I kept it. All I can say is that it just seemed right. And in the end, it's proven to be. Well, plus, I did actually have the trademark for the name, but I guess you could have got a trademark for
another word,
called it something else. But you know, keeping that. I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, that there are a lot of knockoffs of Jenga.
Yeah.
But that, so to a certain extent, it ended up being the one thing that really protected the game, the intellectual property rights of the game, was the fact that I stuck at that name.
Yeah.
And the most bizarre thing is that years later, and we're talking about this is in 1986 or so it's 30 plus years ago. I've re-met some of the people that took on the game in the first instance in Canada, and also some of the chaps at Hasbro who took on the game, all of whom tell me that it's such a fantastic name. And I what is it? You cannot remember that moment when they were going, the name stinks, you know, it's a terrible name.
Pues sí, creo que sí es bastante fácil ver todo en retrospectiva y decir todo va a salir bien y el nombre va a ser un éxito y el nombre va a ser conocido por el juego, nada más. Pero ahora quiero preguntarte algo, porque ya llevabas 3 años intentando comercializar, intentando buscar distribuidores y nada más no pegaba, ¿no? Incluso se podía decir que Jenga en esos 3 años era un fracaso. ¿Qué pasaba por tu cabeza y por qué pensabas que si en esos 3 años no había funcionado, sí funcionaría después y el juego se convertiría en un exitoso juego? ¿Qué te decías a ti en esos 3 años donde nada más no funcionaba nada?
Well, I think the thing I learned actually from day one. I mean, if I'd done a bit of research before it, I would have learned this before day one. But if we talk about day one being when I launched it, which was at the London Toy Fair.
Yeah.
At that toy fair, a lot of people stopped and saw, because we were demonstrating things. A lot of people stopped. They saw it. They loved it. And this is a trade fair. I mean, they loved it in the sense that they were clearly enjoying playing it. But I didn't take a single order at that toy fair, and that is when I realized that the reality of going into the I mean, it's true of the toy business, but I would say it's true of any retail business, is that to be a completely unknown business and have an unknown product where you're not showing, you don't have the wherewithal to actually sort of say how you're going to promote that product, and it's only one product. Almost all buyers for toy stores or for any kind of retail outlet they have to give you shelf space. They have to think about, they're going to give shelf space to something which is not going to sit there and sell itself. It just isn't. And this one in particular is not going to sell itself. It's just a pile of bricks standing there.
Yeah.
And so nobody was prepared to open an account, which in itself was a big enough deal, to actually just buy a few trial copies of a game. They wanted you to have several games. They wanted, if you were a big company and you had several products that they could sort of take 6 of each or something, that would have been easier for them.
Yeah. And
to do this, and as I say, absolutely no promotion. I had no promotion budget other than to do some, sort of press activity. And so, there were a couple of shops that took me that were independents. Harrods took me, and a toy shop, on the understanding that either I went myself or somebody came and actually demonstrated the game in store. And when we did that, it sold very well. But we're still talking about 1 or 2 outlets that were taking at most I don't know, a box of 12 games at the time, that sort of thing. So rather than give up on it, what I thought was, I've got to be a bigger company with more products to sell. So I immediately started producing other games and becoming a games company. And that did help, but it also meant that later on, that games company, which became Oxford Games, is a company that it's still running, and we ended up through that company putting designing and putting about 40 games on the market. But at the time, then I just I thought, okay, I had a word game, and then I had this game, that game, and it did become easier to sell, but it's still. By that stage, I had sunk so much money in doing that. Just setting up that business. Just having and publishing. I was printing these games myself. So I don't know why I continued doing it. I just didn't want to give up. I thought one day somebody's going to get it.
Y alguien sí le entendió, ¿no? Quiero hablar ahorita de Hasbro y de Hassenfeld, porque en la feria en la feria del juguete en Canadá, Hasbro ve a Jenga y le interesa bastante. ¿Nos puedes platicar un poco de qué se sintió eso, de cómo te sentías tú que Hasbro te fue a buscar y te hizo un acuerdo, y un poquito de esa época?
Well, before Hasbro, the Canadian company that took the game was not Hasbro. They were called Irwin Boy, and they came across the game. There was a guy in the company who was I think he was a sort of senior sales manager for Irwin, who saw the game being demonstrated, and they were the ones that wanted initially the license to the game, and they launched it in Canada. And they launched it very successfully in Canada. For all sorts of reasons, it was very successful. They were the biggest toy company in Canada.
Okay.
And they had a relationship with Hasbro. There was a sort of a kind of mutual relationship with Hasbro, that they would, things that went through Irwin, I think Hasbro would, I'm condensing some years here, but essentially it was Irwin that got it up and running, and it was them, and it was the head of Irwin who was it was a family-run business, who was particularly good friends with Alan Alan Hassenfeld, who with his brother at the, ran Hasbro at the time, and they showed. I mean, Alan Hassenfeld tells the story now because he became, he's a good friend, and he tells a story about how it's a 1980. It's going to be 1987, I should think, by then. Of being introduced to this game and playing this game in his hotel room, sitting on the floor with a sort of coffee table, and the Peter Irwin showing it to him, and they're just going, "We want this game. We've got to have this game." But I heard about that retrospectively. When it came to me, it was all very secondhand. So I was, of course, I was pleased, but I didn't know quite what had gone on in the background, and in each case. But I mean, I understand now. I mean, I understood afterwards that in the Irwin case and in the Hasbro case, it was actually essentially because the two heads of the company, in each case, saw the potential of the game that it came about. Because apparently, very few of their marketing people did. I mean, the Irwin people, apparently a lot of them said, "What are we doing? We're not in the business of selling wooden blocks." And apparently, when Alan Hassenfeld sort of told his marketing people that he really, really wanted this game, he again had to do a bit of persuading. At least that's how he tells the story now. So they just got it. They championed it because they got it.
Yeah.
Yeah. What do I mean? I thought at the beginning, I mean, it was pretty exciting to know that I might be, I suppose at the time I just thought if it does well enough to clear my various debts, that would be cool. Then if it does more than that, then that would be amazing.
Y sí, pues Hasbro lo toma la licencia para distribuir el juego y inmediatamente pues es un juego bastante popular y explotaron las ventas no solo en Estados Unidos, sino ya alrededor del mundo. Pero quiero hablar un poco del acuerdo que llegaron con Hasbro, porque leí que personalmente para ti, como la creadora del juego, no fue el mejor acuerdo. No sé si nos puedas platicar un poco más de eso.
Well, the deal with the reason the deal was not the best deal was that I didn't deal directly with either Irwin or with Hasbro.
Okay.
I did it. This becomes an area which I'm slightly careful about what I don't say, because I mean, bottom line is it's amazing. I mean, what's happened with this, and I'm very happy with what's happened, and I'm not critical of either Irwin or Hasbro over this. They've looked after the game incredibly well, and we've all hugely benefited from their sort of stewardship, if you like.
Yeah.
I have a slightly bizarre relationship with somebody. There's a sort of somebody who is I would call him an agent. Okay. But actually, it's not an agent's relationship. I basically assigned the rights to the game to a sort of middle person, and that is something that I would never recommend anybody ever does. I mean, that's just that. The reasons I did that were a lot of reasons why I did that. And it's incredibly hard to say that I regret that, because I don't know, the timing in this industry is everything. Yeah. I mean, time, and you know, I did that. I was at a time when I felt that I needed. Got it. You know, I was not. I really was in debt and things like that. And I was thinking, I've struggled along trying to do this on my own, and I'm never going to be able to have the financial muscle to actually sort of promote this the way it should be promoted.
Yeah.
And I did a deal with a guy who basically was a brother of a friend of mine, and probably wasn't as careful at protecting my own interests as I should have been.
Yeah.
But down the line, it's if I hadn't done that, who knows? Maybe the game would have been, maybe my version, Jenga might have disappeared, but somebody else might have come up with a copy and with more money and got it out there. So hard to sort of.
Who knows?
All I know now is that my daughter is a games designer. She designs actually for Oxford Games, and I am very tenacious on her behalf. That whenever she goes to license out something, I learn from experience what is what's the right way of handling these things. But I will say that, I mean, I still I still work on a royalty basis. It's not. I mean, like, you hear some awful stories of people who, in the toy industry, is full of stories of people who sold out an idea for a lump sum of money, and normally it's a pittance. Yeah. I mean, the Game of Life and all sorts of things like that. Do I mean that? No, I don't mean that. Operation. Yeah. And various games like that have all sorts of stories where the creator, the inventor of it, the designer of it, ends up with a few thousand when the thing goes on to sell millions. So it's yeah. So I mean, I'm not that hard done by. I don't want to give a hard done by story.
Muchas gracias por compartirnos eso. Y ya por último, no te quiero quitar más tu tiempo, pero ahora ya en el 2020, viendo en retrospectiva, pues la visión de tu juego y de mantener el nombre de Jenga, pues se hizo realidad, porque ya si escuchas Jenga, lo primero que se te viene a la mente y lo único que se te viene a la mente es el juego, ¿no? Entonces sí lograste convertir el nombre o la marca de tu juego en un ícono o en un significado del juego. ¿Cómo te sientes ahorita viendo todo eso en retrospectiva y sabiendo que es, pues yo creo que el segundo o el tercer juego de mesa más jugado en todo el mundo? ¿Cómo te sientes?
I'm in awe of it in some ways. I mean, I think it's an extraordinary feeling. I mean, obviously I don't think about it all the time, but every now and then I'm hit with that fact. I mean, I think I told you I went to Argentina earlier this year and had to rush back from Argentina because of the coronavirus. But and when I went there for the first time last year to Argentina, my first visit there, and I didn't realize until I got there just how well known Jenga is in Argentina. My husband has cousins there that we were staying with, and this cousin was saying, we were driving down the road, and he said, he was saying to me, this Jenga, you do know that Jenga is incredibly well known here. And I said, well, yeah, I mean, I know it's played in Argentina. And he said, no, listen, I'll show you something. So he said something very fast to the taxi driver. And this taxi driver he took his hands off the wheel and turned around and went, kind of like, what? And he just said to this taxi driver, this woman that's driving is, she's the inventor of Jenga. And I mean, it was embarrassing for me, but it was also just like really hit home that this was, and those moments are I don't know if I can put it into words. I mean, it's extraordinary. it's an extraordinary feeling. I'm sure. And fun. It's great fun. I love doing it. I love the fact that I'm known for something that's fun.
Yeah.
it's great. It's fantastic. I mean, you know, I always thought it was going to be a successful game, but no in my imagination could I have imagined that it would have been would have worked like this.
Claro. Y ahorita ya para terminar, Leslie, ¿qué consejo le darías a todas las personas que están empezando algo nuevo? No necesariamente en diseñar un juego de mesa, sino cualquier proyecto, una nueva carrera, un nuevo negocio, un grupo de música, cualquier cosa. ¿Qué consejo le darías? Y más en específico, ¿qué consejo le darías a alguien en la etapa inicial de estos proyectos?
I think it's allow yourself to think. I mean, it's okay to think differently, and don't dismiss an idea. And don't allow other people to squash your idea because it's something that they haven't come across first. I mean, as people, human beings are very, very. We're hardwired to dismiss something before we've even thought about it, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the hardest things, I think, for anybody in the arts, and I would imagine in any other field of life where you're actually being asked to come up with, where you're tasked with coming up with something novel, is actually the truth is that it's really tough to convince people of an idea if it is genuinely novel. So I don't know, just don't give up on it. I mean, if you're convinced that it's new, but it actually either solves a problem in an original way, or you've kind of both created and solved a problem with your idea, you know, stick with it. But also, I would say, don't necessarily do what I did at the beginning, which is, I mean, I was extremely lucky that the fact that I did no research, I knew nothing about the toy industry before I went into it. I was extremely lucky that I, if you like, got away with that.
Yeah.
You know, people are, if you're wanting to do, if you've got something that you want to get out there, don't give up with it, but equally I would take it. I mean, don't as your first idea necessarily want to produce it yourself, because that can be very expensive. And if you don't end up convincing people that it's great, it can be a very expensive route to have taken. So, sorry, that's a very muddled way of saying trust in yourself, but at the same time do your homework, maybe.
Pues muchísimas gracias, Leslie. El consejo está increíble y de verdad fue un honor hablar contigo. Desde que tengo recuerdo, juego Jenga. Creo que es uno de los juegos, ya lo he repetido muchas veces aquí, pero creo que es uno de los juegos más populares de todo el mundo y que sin duda alguna marcaron pues nuestra época y siguen marcando épocas en todas estas nuevas generaciones. De verdad, muchísimas gracias por tu tiempo y por platicar con nosotros.
It was a pleasure too, and I'm sorry it took so long for us to connect.
Yeah, a pandemic got in the middle, so. Pues esto fue todo. Esto fue la historia de Leslie Scott y cómo diseñó Jenga, uno de los juegos más populares en todo el mundo. Espero te haya gustado este episodio número 29 de Diseño Feliz por Disliz. Yo soy Enrique y nos escuchamos en el próximo episodio. Muchísimas gracias.